So let's say you're done. You're absolutely done. You can't take another minute in your unhappy household. Can you take your children? Or what happens if you leave your marital home and your children behind?
Okay. So a couple of complexities going on there.
Yeah.
Number one, when two folks are living together and they separate, when that crux moment comes that they split, neither party has exclusive custodial rights. These people have equal custodial rights under the Children's Law Reform Act until there is either A, a court order, B, a separation agreement, or C, what's called a de facto custody arrangement with the knowledge and consent of the other party. That's the complicated part. So, if Jane says to Bill, I'm leaving and I'm taking little Jimmy and little Judy with me, and Bill says, fine, go ahead. She packs up the kids and leaves, and is now gone for 2, 3, 4 months living in another location, whether in the same city or otherwise, with his knowledge and his silence. Then in my view, he's created a de facto custody situation where she has de facto, which means in fact, custody until a court orders otherwise. So she's got those kids with her. On the other hand, if she says, I'm taking the kids and I'm leaving, he says, no, you're not.
Right.
And he picks up the phone and calls the cops. Depending upon the officer you get, because discretion will now come into play, an officer may say, you can't take those kids, or an officer may say, that's a civil family law matter, go to court and work it out. But if one spouse says, you're not taking the children out of the home, that's technically, the other spouse trying to take them is technically kidnapping under the criminal code.
Right.
Now, that charge will not be prosecuted without the consent of a Crown attorney, because the law understands that those are volatile situations. But the short answer is, if the other spouse says fine, not a problem. If the other spouse says no, you may have an on-the-spot moment of difficulty. The practical way this plays out usually is one spouse doesn't ask, one spouse just does it.
Right.
The other spouse finds out after the fact, whether it's an hour, a day, a week, says bring them back. The other spouse says do something biologically impossible. And in that case, the spouse who doesn't have the kids needs to get to court as quickly as possible. Time is not their friend.
Right.
The longer they allow that status quo situation to continue, the more likely it is a judge will say, well, you impliedly consented with your silence or with your inaction. But if someone finds out on Friday that the kids have been taken, Monday morning starts a court application saying, no, I never consented. I want them back. I want sole custody, or I want shared or joint custody. The court will consider that and deal with that on an emergency motion. You can get that in front of a judge within a few days on an urgent motion to have something dealt with so that status quo doesn't continue. The biggest problem that a lot of people create for themselves is they let that situation go on for months and months and months, sometimes years.
Right.
Then later say, well, I want to challenge it. It's going to be tough to challenge it unless you can prove there was a reason you couldn't do anything about it.
But I've also heard about people that leave their home, leave their children, and they're told they're abandoning.
Sure, because the reverse applies, right?
Abandoning their children, abandoning the marital home.
So the whole abandonment's no big deal because it's just bricks and mortar. A court's eventually going to deal with it and likely order it divided or sold.
Yeah.
Whether you leave it, you don't leave it. Unless there's a claim for exclusive possession based on very particular circumstances, it usually involves very young children. Exclusive possession claims are becoming more and more rare. Okay. So I don't worry about people leaving the house.
Okay,
I worry about people leaving the kids.
Yes.
Because again, if you leave the kids behind, you have impliedly said A, the parent with whom I've left them is just dandy.
Right.
Good luck later alleging they're not a great parent.
Right.
Because then the question will be, well, if they're not a great parent, then why did you leave your kids with that bad person?
Right.
Makes you a lousy parent or a lousy decision maker. And it creates a status quo in the reverse. Now you've got the status quo where the kids are at home. That person leaves a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, comes along and says, I'd like the kids for the next week. The other person says, that's not going to happen.
Sorry.
And then what do? Well, now you're going to court. The argument in court will be, well, that person abandoned these kids. He or she didn't want them. They've obviously demonstrated they're not a very good parent. Look at what horrible things they did to the kids by bailing on them. And again, a lot turns on the age of the kids. If we're talking about 15-year-old kids, most of that argument's not going to fly.
No.
If you're talking about a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, that's a huge argument.
Sure.
So I say to people, be careful about leaving. If you tell me that you ultimately want to have custody of or primary residence of your kids, do not leave them behind. You're creating a status quo that now becomes an uphill battle for you. Don't do it. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Take them with you. Now, difference if there's domestic violence.
Right.
If there's something that's threatening, if there's a violent situation, if you have to leave, then I say to that person, you try to get to a place of safety with your kids. Fair that you call the police immediately, get the police there with the aid of the police, take your kids.
Good point.
If none of that can possibly be done, if you literally need to flee for your safety,
Right.
you get in front of a judge literally within 24 to 48 hours on an urgent motion. You can even bring an urgent motion sometimes without notice to the other side to get that situation dealt with, especially if there's a situation of urgency that's been created by the other person.
Right. So they'll allow for that.
So leaving the kids is a bad idea. Letting the other person leave with the kids is a bad idea. Judges like status quo. You know, there's that old saying, nobody likes change except a wet baby. It's a natural inclination of human beings, and judges are human beings, to look at a situation and say, well, it's been like that for the last 3 or 4 weeks, months, years. Why should I change it now? Speaking of which, I should salt the veal now, because otherwise it's not going to be exactly the way we want it. So I don't like those situations being created, so I tell people that's probably the most difficult issue to untwine.
Right.
Property issues, like I said about the house, who cares? That thing's going to get divided and sold. You leave the car behind, who cares? That thing's going to get valued and sold. You leave the jewelry, whatever, unless it's something that can vanish or disappear. I guess big diamonds, negotiables, you know, plates to print money, that kind of stuff. But the kids are usually the big area of concern, because that's usually a very emotionally driven issue, and it's often the one that causes people to become the most litigious, to become the most entrenched, and to spend the most money in litigation. Very important to plan that ahead. Get legal advice before you do it. Don't jump without knowing where you're jumping. It's a very, very important area to get your advice beforehand. It's easy to get experienced family law lawyers on the phone, you know, to quote Ferris Bueller, ringy dingy. Know what you're getting into before you make the move, because it's a hard mess to untie. It's like untying fishing line once it's messed up.